I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on December 22nd, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. Right above Bruno, there is the link to our chat room. Click on it, it'll take you to YouTube. Sign in with your Google account, and we'd love to have you in chat for your questions. If you're listening after the fact and you have questions, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can do that right there on YouTube, and it'll notify you whenever we publish something new. Bruno Zadi is our host today. He works as a coaching community leader in APAC with Gallup. And Bruno, it's always great to thank you for closing out 2021 with me. Welcome back to Call to Coach.
Thank you, Jim. That's great to be with you, and welcome, Lynn, to this show. So I'm very happy to have you. So today I have a special guest. It's Lynn Garber. Lynn is based in Melbourne, Australia. She's an American, originally from Boston and New Jersey a little bit, as I heard. So Lynn runs her own management consulting firm since the last 15 years. She's a Gallup certified strength coach, but she's also certified on many other certifications. And what I love in this show is Lynn will bring a lot of insight and different perspective. Lynn top 5 are connectedness, relator, empathy, individualization, and activator. So it's a lot of blue. I can see a lot of building relationship here. Lynn is also certified in emotional intelligence, and she took the accreditation with Genos. And the particularity of the topic today is how to develop emotional intelligence using CliftonStrengths. And the reason I invited Lynn in this podcast, it's Genos, it's all about the workplace and performance using emotional intelligence. So it's what we will cover today. Lynn is also a big learner, and she learned a lot. She have high input, and she have participate to 2 research projects. So one it's in 2013. It's the Gen Y leaders, how to lead any generation if you are in generation Y. And the second one was in 2009, emerging leaders, the transition from technical specialists to people leaders. So we'll get a lot of insight to combine all of that. So Lynn, welcome to Call to Coach.
Thank you, Bruno. It's great to be here with you.
Lynn, before to start on the topic emotional intelligence, I would like to know if you could share with us how you discovered CliftonStrengths and what brought you to the course originally. And I know there were a story around Jim and you as well during this course. So could you please share with us?
Sure. I started my coaching practice in the early 2000s when it was just getting some recognition as a profession. And I started out by, as part of my process, getting people to really understand what their strengths were. And I always found that they were reluctant to talk about them. And although I wasn't able to do a Gallup strengths course, I was well aware of the certification, and I just put it off until it was a time appropriate for me to do it. And so, because I was already aware of it, I saw the accelerated course being made available in 2014, and I decided I was just going to go ahead and do it. And one of the facilitators, I'm still friends with one of the facilitators from that, who used to work for Gallup. And so, that's what led me to do the course and complete the course. And during that, they had a call to coach, which Jim was facilitating, and I had a chance to speak about empathy, which happened to be in my top 5, which I had really kind of buried. I didn't necessarily want it to be well known, I guess, and because I was in the technology industry, you had to wear a kind of armor and all that. And so anyway, it was a time when I said, right, I'm going to just own this now, and I felt liberated. So that was my experience with Call to Coach, and the certification and how I got involved with Gallup.
Lynn, you have run your own business since 15 years. So you have
Yeah.
been through a crisis, through a discovery. You know very well the workplace in Australia, what's going on. Can you please share with us uh, who are your typical clients, what kind of practice you're doing, what's your expertise, and a little bit what you have observed since COVID in the workplace?
So my clients range from emerging leaders, sometimes leaders who are technology professionals who are first-time leaders and they go through a transition. Sometimes they are people who are in career transition, but mostly they are in the corporate world and they are senior or executive leaders who are in need of developing their human connection skills. So I say that I help leaders accelerate their leadership development growth by focusing on their human skills, which helps them grow in their confidence for leading themselves and others, which in turn creates high impact teams. And what I've noticed in COVID is that there's a kind of a new skill that leaders need to lead and get collaboration and get engagement while people are virtual. It is very difficult to build trust, I find, in if you are solely virtual. If you meet a person face to face, you've got all of the other dimensions in the human element and the human connection available to you that we don't even realize. And what fatigues us in the virtual world is that we have to now bring that awareness up to the surface, and we have to work at it more. So I'm noticing that people are really fatigued and they're trying to do much more than they were trying to do before. And when they're leading their people, there's a bit of empathy and compassion that is needed even more than before, because again, you don't have the multidimensional interaction with people. So they need the development on digital body language. And I found that there are some new skills that people need to learn, and there are some things that people need to bring to the surface that maybe they had taken for granted.
You have done some research across different generations, and
Yeah.
I imagine you have observed and I would say come to a conclusion of the will of this generation. Did you observe some pattern between generation about what they want, etc.?
Well, what I found is that each generation wants the same thing. They just go about getting it differently. So they want connection, they want to be led, they want recognition. And there was I can't remember who did it, but there was another organization after I did my research that did some research with 86,000 participants, and they got the same exact results that I got. People want connection, they want feedback, and they want to be able to be led by someone who cares about them and wants to help develop them.
It's very interesting because Gallup have done some research on millennials, and we have published some research and collect a lot of data in this area. And on the wheel, what we realize it's most of the millennials, what they don't want a boss, they want a coach. They want ongoing development, and they are big, they want a purpose. It's not about the job, it's really about the purpose, about giving back, helping,
Mm,
contributing.
mm,
And
mm,
it's very aligned with what you explain.
mm,
So also in your private life, I know you play some instrument, you play
mm-hmm.
some violin in some
Yes.
orchestra sometime.
Yeah.
And we had this conversation before, and I wanted to know how being a musician can help you as a coach in terms of playing in a band or in an orchestra. Do you believe that as a coach in active listening, that's helped to develop some capabilities there?
Well, when you're a musician and you play in an orchestra as part of a larger group, you have to be aware of your own music, your own, your own pitch, making sure you're playing in tune. You have to also hear the second violins and the violas and the cellos and the brass and the winds, and you have to concentrate on resting. If you're in resting and the rest of the orchestra is playing, there's so many things you have to do at once. And so there's a lot of self-awareness there, and there's a lot of awareness of others, as you can hear in when we talk in a little bit about the GENOS, what a GENOS emotional intelligence model is. There's a lot of self-awareness, but awareness of others, and you're constantly listening. I mean, one of the things that that I do quite naturally as a transferable skill in my coaching is I'm listening. I'm listening between the lines. I'm listening for language. I'm listening for how people express their story. I'm listening for inflections in their voice in how they express the story. And when their pitch changes in their voice, then I'm hearing a bit more passion. Then that's a little hint and maybe a little flashlight or light on something that I might investigate. So yes, it's the emotional intelligence of the awareness and self-awareness, but you, as you were talking about before, it's the listening, and listening for so much more than just what the person is saying. It's listening in a very strategic way, I guess you might say.
Mhm. As we are going in the topic of how to develop emotional intelligence using CliftonStrengths, what I would like to start with is to explain a little bit what is emotional intelligence and what it is so important to develop the emotional intelligence in the workplace. So we have both collected different definitions. What I will share with our coaching community today is the Oxford definition, and after I would like you to share a little bit the GENOS perspective on emotional intelligence. For the Oxford definition, it's the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotion, and to handle interpersonal relationship judiciously and empathetically. Now, the reason I approach you about emotional intelligence is you're certified in GENOS, and you are one of the rare coach who use CliftonStrengths as part of your strategy to develop emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please define a little bit based on GENOS, firstly where it's come from, and secondly why it's so compatible with CliftonStrengths?
Okay. All right. So I like that definition of the Oxford because it's simple. It's simple and minimal, and it cuts right to the chase of it. GENOS is developed by Dr. Ben Palmer of Sydney, and has grown out of his PhD thesis from Swinburne University. And he's constantly growing and adding more things with an emotional intelligence, an EI foundation. So GENOS defines emotional intelligence as a set of skills. And that's what I really like. It's a set of skills. So it means that you can enhance, it means you can get better at these competencies that help us better perceive, understand, and manage emotion in ourselves and others. And collectively, there are 6 of them, they help us make intelligent responses to and use of our emotions. These skills are as important as your intellect, and I feel in this day and age, probably more important. I mean, I know when I was hiring people, I would, running as a leader myself, I would rather have somebody who was strong in emotional intelligence, and I called it a good attitude. And because we can teach them the skills if they've got the basics of the skills, but you can't. It takes a long time to change people's behaviors and mindsets. And so these skills are important because they help determine success in work and in life. And GENOS has a workplace focus, which is the other thing that I really like about it. So everyone, no matter what job function, we all have interactions with other people. And so your capacity to understand your own emotions and be aware of them and how they impact the way you interact with other people and the way you behave will improve your people skills, these soft skills, which I believe are much more important now in the virtual world than ever, and help you ultimately be more satisfied and successful. That's how they define emotional intelligence.
Yeah, what I really like, we talk about emotional intelligence a lot together, And it's very interesting the way our road across. It's
Yes.
because I was on the way to develop myself on this certification because I wanted to see how we can use CliftonStrengths. And I realized I was just finishing my certification that you have done yours. And what I like here, it's really focused on workplace and on performance.
Yeah.
And CliftonStrengths, when you use in the workplace, it's a focus on performance as well, because
Yes.
you reverse engineering, you start by what you want to achieve and you use strength to basically develop yourself to be able to achieve. So before to go in the 6 competencies who are very specific, and some have already been discussed on Call to Coach, such as self-awareness and emotional awareness of others, I would like to understand a little bit about you explained that you always start when you want to develop emotional intelligence, you start by CliftonStrengths instead
Yes.
of starting by GENOS, which is an assessment on emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Can you explain why do you start by CliftonStrengths assessment to develop emotional intelligence?
Yes. Well, this is a really good question. When we talk about what we do, sometimes as coaches and as consultants and entrepreneurs, when we run our own practice, is everybody likes to talk about all of the things that they do well and all of the success stories. And I have about 3 success stories I talk about. But I'm going to be honest here and talk about a big failure because I did not use, and I was not certified as a Gallup Strengths coach before I did this with one of my clients, a technology guy, that I ran his Leadership 360. It was a complete failure. And what did I learn? Well, he was not ready for the feedback. He was not prepared. He was, and I didn't read it right. So we had covered his strengths, but he didn't have the data. And if I had the CliftonStrengths and done this, I would have known that he needed the data and he needed hardcore evidence in order to see things. So we didn't cover strengths enough, so that when he got his GENOS results, he denied it all. He went and tried to defend everything and said that the assessment was wrong, yet he was the one that filled it out. So it created a very disappointing situation for me, because he was in a state of threat and he couldn't take in what we were doing. So I learned from that and said, right, I start with strengths in everything I do. My practice, I start with everyone, whether it's a team or an individual, I start with strengths. And one of my successes is that starting with strengths is that the feedback from my client was that it gave him confidence to receive feedback for development. So because he became very self-aware of the things he was already doing well, it gave him a sense of, oh yeah, that's me. Okay, yep. Oh, so I can take this and I can learn from it. And then I had him do an overlay of how was he going to get better at the thing that we had chosen in his GENOS EI results using his strengths. So there you go. There's a success story
Okay,
and why I decide now to always start with strengths.
to
And
provide
I don't want any of you to be in that position to have that situation. So start with strengths.
to provide a little bit of context to our coach here, basically when you use GENOS, you can use a 180 or 360.
Correct.
So it's very important to start with strength. And it's very interesting because we have Marilu Almeida who talked about 360 months ago, and she was explaining exactly the same scenario where she starts with strength to make sure the coachee take ownership and understand, and you have a better outcome when you start and say, yes, it's me, and after you can have a better constructive conversation.
Yeah.
Now, as we are going in emotional intelligence, we have identified 6 core emotional intelligence competency in the workplace, and there is self-awareness, emotional awareness of others, authenticity, emotional reasoning, self-management, and positive influence. So that's the GENOS model, and it's very linked to the workplace as a leader. What I would like to start is here, do you believe, Lynn, that you need to start like a pyramid of Maslow, some of them on certain order, or can we work in disorder if, let's say, someone you want to develop emotional reasoning? To develop this capability, do you have to start by self-awareness first, emotional awareness, etc.? How does that work?
Well, we were talking about this, and I like the idea of a pyramid, but more of a foundation, self-awareness. No matter what model you follow, whether it's Goleman or Genos, it always starts with self-awareness. Because if you don't know yourself and you don't know how you behave, how you react, how you respond to situations, what triggers that you have, then you can't. There's nothing to build on. You can't understand another. You need to understand yourself first, and understand your relationship with yourself first, in order to understand the impact that you have on others. Many of my clients, in the technology field, are very honest, black and white folks, and because they work with technology, and it's just the way they're made up and the way they think. And they sometimes lack the polish, if you will, of the soft skills. And they say they're being honest, but they hit you over the head with their honesty instead of being aware of how is this going to land with the other person. So the impact, what are the impact of my words and how I'm saying it? How's it going to land on the other person? So as you can see, self-awareness is first, then awareness of others is next. And the authenticity that we're talking about, as I just said, that they were saying, oh yeah, but I'm authentic. I tell people exactly what I think. And I was like, oh, okay. Do you have a filter there? So awareness of others is that filter.
Mm. And do you have some example to share about how you develop as a coach someone about self-awareness? What kind of exercise or model, or what do you recommend? Do you pick the strength of people and you say, okay, if you have activator, you give some guideline about how to self-regulate this activator through some kind of activity, etc.?
Well, let me think. So what came to mind was a person I worked with who didn't realize that the way he looked and some facial expressions that he had might impact others. And he was one of those that was saying, "Oh, I'm just very, very honest." So he was highly analytical. So it's like turning the analytical on its side and saying, "Okay, so why don't we do a little exercise using your analytical? And I'm going to take a photo of your face, and you just start talking and talk like you're talking to one of your colleagues. And I'm going to take a photo of what you look like while you're talking to one of your colleagues. And then we're going to use your analytical to look at this and figure out what might need to change. How might the other person be impacted by the way you look, for instance? So it's using your analytical, but developing the awareness of others.
Okay. And as we are going to the next capability, it's authenticity. How do you develop authenticity with people? How do you make, we always say, it's not what you say, it's how you say, which is important.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can literally give a message to someone and the person totally ignores the message because you have delivered in a way that is not constructive. What's your recommendation to develop authenticity using CliftonStrengths? What can you share with us?
Well, first let's back up and get the definition of authenticity according to Genos. And authenticity is defined as the skill is openly and effectively expressing oneself, honoring commitments, and encouraging this behavior in others. It involves honesty, expressing specific feelings at work, such as happiness and frustration, and providing feedback to colleagues about the way you feel, and sharing emotions at the right time, to the right degree, and to the right people. This is the key. People high in authenticity are often described as genuine, whereas people low in this skill are often described as untrustworthy. And so the key here is that the example I used before about the guy who said, but I'm just being honest. He was being honest, but he lacked the filter to say, how is this going to impact someone else? And then the way he spoke it, he needed to work on. And so, yes, there were aspects of his authenticity that he was exhibiting this, but he had to maybe rely on other strengths, like where would his, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but where does his responsibility lie, for instance? Or where, because I see sometimes with technical people, they have a lot of high responsibility. So then it's like relying on that. Okay, so you take psychological ownership for what you're doing here. How can you use that to soften the message? Or if they've got communication in some of their supporting themes, how can you rely on that a little bit more than you would deliberately? So it's about being intentional and deliberate. And that's where the self-awareness comes in. So self-awareness sits within authenticity, if that makes sense. So I know I keep going back to that, but the self-awareness and awareness of others kind of is embedded in authenticity, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Absolutely. So I can see how it's linked. And we talk about authentic leadership. And I mean, authentic leadership is not necessarily about delivering the message in a raw manner, but it's, as a leader, it's more about delivering a message to make sure it benefits an outcome and benefits the person, to help people to grow. And there's a way to do that. Now, about emotional reasoning, can you please explain a little bit how you will work if you want to develop emotional reasoning capability?
Yeah, so that's around decision making, isn't it? The emotional
Yes, absolutely.
reasoning. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So emotional reasoning, according to Gallup, is about using the information in your feelings from yourself and others when decision making. And it involves considering your own and others' feelings when making decisions, combining this information in feelings with facts and technical information, and communicating it to others in the process. So feelings and emotions contain important information. One of the things I learned from my master's in org dynamics is that everything is data. Everything is data. And so if you have high empathy like I do, and you wear your heart on your sleeve like sometimes I do, you take things personally. People can tell me till I'm blue in the face to stop taking things personally. Well, you know what? I can't help it. I take things personally. Can't help it. It's just it's kind of the way it is. I try to turn the volume down on it sometimes, the intensity level, but it doesn't always work. But where I was going with that is that my lecturer said to me, Lynn, every bit of emotion is data. So whatever you're feeling, refer to it as data about the situation, about the system of which this person in the workplace may be operating. So all of us have our unique theme sequence, we have our unique strengths, and we operate in a wider organizational system. So it's incorporating everything as data and remembering that it's not personal. I don't know if I've answered your question there, but
yes,
okay.
you have partly answered my question. Where I want to go here, I relate to an example I have in my mind a long time ago. So I'm very practical. I'm someone who is factual. I'm disciplined, focused. It's very about fact. But one of my leaders, she's with a friend of us, which is Claire de Carteret. She's very high in empathy.
Yes.
And we always have some very rich conversation about, for me, fact have to be data. But for someone high in empathy who got a different lens, well, emotion is data. It's like a gut feeling, it's like a different filter. And it's very interesting. Sometimes it's very aligned, and sometimes it's not aligned at all. And I think in terms of lens perspective, it's where the complementary partnership come from.
Yes.
Because someone who got, I don't know, we are both activator, who are fast-paced, etc. It could be nice sometimes to partner with people who are deliberative, analytical, to slow down the pace and have a different emotional reasoning and be able to
Yes.
see different lens and perspective instead of jumping in. And sometimes it's work, and sometimes as an activator we jump quickly and realize, oh damn, I need to go back and do it again because maybe I should have thought better before to act. Yes. So yes, absolutely, emotional reasoning we could use this way. What about self-management? How do we develop self-management using CliftonStrengths?
So the way I think about it, so self-management is basically about managing your own mood and emotions, time and
Mhm.
behavior, and continuously improving yourself. And how I think about this is that once you're aware of what you're already doing well, you can start to take action and rely on what you're already doing well, and say, okay, so that you can modulate the intensity of what you're already doing well. Because I think the real beauty of CliftonStrengths is the combination of the strengths. So they don't stand alone because they combine with each other. So you think about you think about people's strengths, and as I do these many debriefs I've been doing, I talk about the intensity level of, say, responsibility along with achiever. I see this a lot in executives. Responsibility and achiever quite high, and it's about the intensity level. So the self-management is about turning up the volume, like knowing so understand what's going on around you. So awareness of others, understand what's going on around you, and then saying, okay, so what's appropriate for this moment? Do I turn up the volume on this particular strength and make it intense? Is this the right place? Because the whole basis of emotional intelligence is the right emotion at the right time to the right degree. And I'm talking about the degree now. So that's the intensity level. Or do I turn the volume down on that, the intensity level down on that, because it's the combination, responsibility and achiever. Because so what that looks like is somebody who takes so much psychological ownership and has to achieve outcomes that they leave people behind. So if there's not a relationship building, complementary, maybe another executive on the team can help them with that. But they've got to be self-aware enough to know how to modulate themselves. So that's the self-management piece.
So does that mean I'm thinking about the report CliftonStrengths? If an organization, when you deliver a workshop, or if you don't purchase yourself the report you want, what do you do if someone come with a top 5? It privates you to half of the lens because you have only 5 strengths who are in a report. And if you need to self-manage yourself, you need to understand who you are and have a full vision of all the full 34, I imagine. Does that make sense, what I explained?
Can you just say it again so that I
Yes,
can?
absolutely.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you work with an organization who use top 5 only,
Who only use top 5? Yes, I got it.
in
Yep.
terms of self-management,
Yes.
it's reduce your capability to self-manage people if they have, imagine if your top 5, you have only executing 10, but in your top 10, you have 4 different domains.
Yes.
In terms of development of people, I think it's very important to use a full 34 report to have
I
a
agree.
bigger lens. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? Have you
Yes.
been challenged by that?
No, because I only do the
Okay.
full 34. I did for a while. A couple of projects ago, I did the top 5, and I just found it more difficult. Didn't give me as much information and context, not context in the way we describe context, but I mean, Gallup describes context in the themes, but enough of a understanding of the whole picture, the whole system. And the full 34 gives me the whole system, and it's much more rich and gives me a whole lot more depth to work with, and that will speed up. And I think that's the thing that I really like about this combination of emotional intelligence and using strengths to start with to help build this emotional intelligence, is that it is efficient. And today people want efficiency. They want to go fast and they want to get stuff done yesterday. But this is really an efficient way of creating an organization. Say you have a mandate to, as a CEO, to change the culture. So I have one of my clients has partially, he's got to do that. and we've started with strengths. And it's been so well received that the executive level want to go the next level down and the next level down. So they want to know the full 34 of their team so that they can help them work in a complementary way. So they're getting the efficiency as well. And also developing an awareness of how important it is to know what people's strengths are so that you can maximize them.
That makes sense. The last competency I would like to talk about is positive influence before to jump after on strength-based leadership.
Yes.
But can you define a bit of positive influence, and then after we'll talk about your practice, because you're one of the unique people I know in Australia who use so many times the strength-based leadership report.
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's define first positive influence.
So positive influence is, as it says, positively influencing the way others feel through problem solving, feedback, recognizing, and supporting others' work. It involves creating a positive working environment. So that's the culture, that organizational system, helping others find effective ways of responding to upsetting events and effectively helping people resolve issues that are affecting their performance. It helps people create a productive environment for others, and that is the key. And it's people who can positively influence others' moods, feelings, and emotions are empowering to work with and easily motivate those around them. And of course, with that motivation, engagement follows. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so, and so the second part of your question is how do you use emotional CliftonStrengths to develop positive influence, right? I think once you understand, so people like this organization I'm working with, once that executive level does their strengths, the next level does. Already, just by implementing it, it starts to create a positive influence because it's a positive lens on what people are already doing well, and maximizing that. Not saying there's no weaknesses. I always say to everybody, I'm not saying we don't have weaknesses. We all do. But Drucker said, the role of a leader is to maximize the strength to make the weaknesses irrelevant. And so, that it's the way you organize, the way you understand complementary. We were talking about that, complementary strengths, making sure that people can work together. I think when a project team first starts up in the project initiation phase, it's the number one thing you should do immediately is just get everybody doing their strengths. It'll feel slow at the start, but it speeds things up enormously. So I don't know whether you know this or not, but it's just a little tidbit of information. We can tell within 10 feet and 0.07 seconds whether someone likes us or not, whether they're judging us, and what they think about us. So just think about that for a minute. Within 10 feet, you get within 10 feet of someone, and if they look at you funny, and you can tell that it's just such an unconscious thing, whether it's a friend or a foe. And so that says that in terms of positive influence, your emotional state is infectious. And so if it can be infectious negative, I know I want mine to be infectious positive. So, and CliftonStrengths helps, as I was saying before, create that positivity.
You are using a lot also the strength-based leadership. So just to explain a little bit, the strength-based leadership, it's about the need of the follower, and it's include 4 capabilities: stability, trust, hope, and compassion. Okay, that's in a book.
And stability.
Yes, stability, trust, hope, and compassion.
Yep.
Absolutely. And can you explain why are you using this report, strength-based leadership, all the time with your client?
Yes, I used to be on the old Gallup online platform, and that was available for producing the reports there. And then I moved over to Access, and they didn't move that one over. So I still love that report and rely on it. So why do I use it? Because the manager's report is fantastic, and the new manager's report is fantastic in conjunction with the full 34. And I see little bits of the SBL embedded in some of the comments and actions in the manager's report. So well done there. I'm really happy that you've done that. I feel that the manager's report is the strengths from a manager perspective, from the role of manager. In terms of the strengths-based leadership report, what it does is it gives this leader an understanding of what what the followers need. So it comes from a different angle. So top down and then bottom up. And I feel that those two together give a complete picture for a leader or manager. And that's why I use the strengths-based leadership report, because it shows how each strength builds trust, hope, compassion, and stability using your strengths, and also shows you what it sounds like and gives you action items and goes really much more in depth about how to use each one of those strengths of the top 5.
How can we use CliftonStrengths to be authentic and connect with others and build trust?
Okay, how can we use... Sorry, can you just say that again?
Yes, how can we use our CliftonStrengths
Yes.
to be authentic and connect with others and build trust? I try to establish a link between authenticity and trust and how to develop that, basically. If you see some correlation and if you have some idea how to develop. Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because as I read before, the authenticity, people who are high in authenticity are described as genuine and therefore trustworthy. Whereas people who are low in the skill are often described as untrustworthy. So people who say, all right, I'm going to go to bat for you, and they go to bat for them. If you're in sales, they make a commitment to a client and they deliver on that commitment. This is authenticity. Authenticity is also being able to express how you're feeling to the right degree, to the right person, and with the right emotion behind it. And I don't know if you can see this, but the self-awareness and the awareness of others is so intricately embedded, if you will, in authenticity, that if you have developed your self-awareness, then you know how you're speaking, you can hear what you're saying, you know how it's landing with others, then you're able to say, okay, my people aren't able to hear this right now, so I'm not going to say it now, or I'm going to say it in a different way. And it doesn't mean you have to tell everybody about the worst thing that's happened to you in your day, or the horrible things that have happened. I don't. It's not about that. It's about appropriately and with understanding of how you're feeling, making sure your self-management, that you are in a place where you are aware of how it's going to land with the other person, and you're able to use, say, your empathy in this way to create trust. And you're also creating compassion. You're also giving compassion and hope. And this creates stability also for people when you're authentic and you do what you say you're going to do. And trustworthy. I think the key word is trustworthy here for authenticity. And so high responsibility, it will come more naturally. Maybe if you don't have high responsibility, there are other strengths that will help you get there through the combination of strengths. But I think just even being aware of your top 10 is going to help enormously, and your bottom 5. So knowing that it's going to take more energy. So you say communications at the in my bottom 5. Well, that's okay. I have that available to me. What else can I use in conjunction with communication to help people and to be trustworthy myself? So I don't know, there's a lot of thinking going on, and that's my connectedness too, that's making all these links.
Yes, and your futuristic intellection. I can see all your strength play in action here. lot of strategic thinking on your 6 to 10. Now, I would like to talk about something. A lot of people, we heard a lot on different review that it's important as a leader to have empathy.
Yes.
But people are also very confused between empathy and compassion, which is different. Do you believe that if you develop your self-awareness and the awareness of others, you can be compassionate and care about people and still have my empathy is 33. It's on the bottom.
Oh yeah.
But I'm still very compassionate and I care about people. So what's your view on that? If you have a low empathy and as a leader you need to be compassionate, what will be your strategy? What will be your recommendation?
Well, that has happened, and I've had the leaders say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I can't believe empathy is so low because I'm such a compassionate person. I really care about people." I said, "It's okay. Let me explain what empathy means in this context." And then we go through and I say, "This is what it actually means. It's that you tune into and you feel what other people are feeling." I said, "In your role with all of your other strengths, that will derail you. So that's why that is sitting down here. And it's appropriate that it's sitting down here, but let's look at your responsibility. Let's look at your other strengths, that maybe the individualization, maybe the arranger, that come together to consider the best for other people." And that's how I work with them to understand that. But they need to have a basis of self-awareness and awareness of others in terms of, I keep going back to emotional intelligence, in order to have that conversation. So I usually, it's funny, most people's self-awareness, I don't know if the other coaches have seen this too, but most people's self-awareness increase as if you get a chance to do the debriefs with them, increase as a result of going through what their strengths are. Their self-awareness is increased automatically, it seems. And they become aware, oh, well, I used to do that way, but now I see, now I understand. And so as they think about themselves, as they think about their combination of strengths and what they're doing, it really helps lift their self-awareness. And so with the empathy, I just look for other ways for them to help them see that they can be compassionate, understanding, caring, but they get there in a different way. I mean, just because you don't have competition on your top 5 as a salesperson doesn't mean you're not a competitive salesperson. You know what I'm saying? Because I've experienced that myself. I don't have competition high, but my competition, as when I was selling in technology, my competition would just all of a sudden, come racing up when I was competing for a deal. So then I'd enhance my relationship building skills. I would go in and say, okay, what are we going to do? I'd enhance the relationship building. So you get there in a different way.
Yeah, it's a different lens based on the combination, and sometimes it could be perceived as competition, but it's not necessarily competition. It could be a mix of achiever significance or whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. The combination are very important. Now, can you outline a program you are working on to develop leader on emotional intelligence? Do you have a specific program? Do you have some example to share?
Sorry, can you just
Yeah,
say that?
if you want to develop some capability on emotional intelligence, do you work on specific program to help leader?
Well, Genos has a variety of emotional intelligence programs, and I am not working specifically because I integrate. I integrate things into my practice. So I will integrate aspects of emotional intelligence, say, into a communicating effectively program that I might run, or I'm integrating aspects of neuroscience, for instance, when I'm running a program, and I find that if I have a Genos program, the most recent one is their leader as coach program, where I would still start with strengths at the beginning of that program, and it's 4 modules long, and help people become better coaching leaders. So I don't have emotional intelligence program I'm running right now, but I am integrating aspects of Genos EI into every program that I am running. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, what when you meet a client and you have a 15 years experience as a management consulting firm, how do you decide what you integrate, what you don't? What's your reasoning behind? Because you cross probably the same challenge in many clients, which is working remotely, create trust, engaging team, and all of that. What will make your decision to use more CliftonStrengths or another assessment or combine many of them? And we talked about yesterday a little bit together that you were using sometimes old framework or assessments because sometimes you don't have enough lens and you need to add more. Can you please share a bit? Because I found that very interesting, the way you operate. You are really open mind and very generous in your learning.
Yeah, so I first look at what is the business outcome that they're looking for? What is the business issue that they may be dealing with? And so I'm always focused on the business. So how is this going to help the business? So a first conversation I have is, where are you headed? And if I run a if I run a strengths program with them, which includes the debriefs of the executives and then a workshop, I want to know where the organization's going. So that'd be my futuristic and some of the strategic. I want to know the big picture of where they're headed so that I can blend and customize accordingly. So I don't have a process that I just slap on everybody regardless of what it is that they're trying to achieve. I go to what is it that they want? What is it that they need? What is most appropriate for them? What will help them efficiently get to their goals, and what in my toolkit or my background and certifications do I have that is going to help them? And I always start with strengths. I know that's a big message. I keep saying that, but I always start with strengths because I believe it and EI are the foundation to efficiently getting to business goals.
That's brilliant sharing. Yes, I'm
you.
thinking in the same time because you give me a lot of new idea. And okay, so you always start with strengths. What about team? Do you work with team as well? I mean, if you want to achieve a
Yes.
goal and with a team, do you start with strength and you start with a team grid, or you start individual?
I start with the individual, do the debriefs, then I do the team grids, and I do the team grids depending on how high the analytical is. I just adjust my approach depending on what the group looks like together, what the individuals look like. And
Yeah.
I've learned from experience that you need to keep people engaged and active and practical. You're practical, Bruno, so am I. And unless something is going to help people learn here and now and help it stick, I'm really not interested in doing any just for a theoretical exercise. It's got to actually have some outcome that's going to be meaningful to them. And so yes, when I work with teams, I do the debrief, I do a lot of team grids, and then in the workshop, depending on what their focus is, we usually have an activity that is business based with a business case that people get to work on to leverage their strengths.
It looks like it's your achiever kicking, but I know you don't have achiever. It's your responsibility mixed with your futuristic.
Yes.
And that's a perfect example of when we don't
Yeah.
have a strength and we tap in another strength to achieve something. I really love what you explain. Yes. Jim, do you have some question to add?
Well, we're getting close to the end, which goes very fast. Been very fascinated to listen to this. Let me bring in a comment. Catherine in the chat room says she's been doing 90-minute debriefs where she includes the blind spots and helping expressions, right? This is where we talk about self-awareness in this system, and it's been identified as the favorite,
Well done.
the favorite
Fantastic.
section. Well, and I think it gives people an opportunity. I mean, I think we all know we emotionally struggle, especially in these areas of the decision-making process, right? We get very instinctual on them. We kind of go to the very, especially when we're under stress, right? Then those begin to get very automatic for us. A couple of years ago, I'm still kind of new to figuring, I'm 53 and I'm still kind of figuring some of this stuff out. But I began to realize, and I started watching for these emotional triggers, right? These moments when I could feel things beginning to happen and then the automatic beginning to kick in. And I am still working on that, where I kind of recognize those moments. There's still moments I go through and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have caught myself in the middle of
Yeah.
that one. Sometimes I'm catching more, sometimes I'm catching less. As we think about that idea, that self-awareness, any tips to help people catch themselves in those moments, or begin to figure out, okay, when I have these overwhelming feelings, how do I stop for a second and call it for what it is, to recognize it, to do something different? Any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, your self-awareness is really kicked in there, okay? So when you deliberately focus then on a thought, because every thought has an emotion attached to it. So if you go back and you say, well, what was I thinking in the last 10 seconds or the last 15 seconds or the last 20 seconds, you're going to get some insight into the emotion attached to that. And then right there, you've got your pause. So it's a deliberate thinking first, remembering that every thought has an emotion attached to it, and then saying, what was I just thinking? And I've done this a lot. So I was just thinking, oh, I was actually thinking of a sad thing. Oh, that explains why I just got grumpy with my husband. Because I'm reacting. It's like, oh darn, I wish I hadn't done that. But then, you catch yourself, and all of us are always learning all the time. And we've got billions of thoughts going on all the time with just heaps of emotions. And one of the other things is to just name it, right? Say what emotion it is, because our emotional vocabulary is very limited. Happy, sad, frustrated, angry. So that's about like 4. There's an activity I do that says, what were in the last 24 hours, how many emotions did you feel? People come up with 5, 6, right? Then I say, okay, go to this table back here. When I did it in person, I've got 150 emotions cards laid out. Pick up some other ones that you felt, right? So then they come back and there's like 11, 12, 13 or more, because they've had a chance to think about it.
Yeah.
So I think being deliberate, thinking, what was I just thinking the last 10 seconds, 30 minute, whatever, and then naming the emotion. And then you're on your way, because you've created that little pause, if you will.
Yeah, I think each time it gets a little bit easier,
And it does.
and it never gets totally easy. I mean, there's still sometimes we slip and go back. I had a friend who I've known for the last 20 years. I hadn't seen him in the last 3, and I had lunch with him the other day. And he said to me, you used to get kind of, anxious and depressed during the holidays. How's this holiday going? And I thought, I haven't had that thought in a while, but now that you said it, I'm going to think about that. Like,
thanks a lot.
It was one of those moments. It's like, oh yeah, I guess I did. And then, but it caused me to work through, like, what's changed since then. What am I doing different now? What existed then that doesn't exist now? To your point, you get these data points. I think that's kind of even what you said in the very beginning, right? You get these data points that you can start kind of, oh, okay, wait a minute. That was this, and this was then, and these kinds of things were happening, and this was the background, and this is how I was responding to it, and this is why I was responding to it. And it gives us that chance to kind of start putting those pieces together. Catherine also wants to get an official hashtag going. Start with strengths.
Go for it. Love
from
it.
You. So great. And then she also mentions, it's very interesting that you're talking about EI tonight, because I'm going to take a EI certification next month, the EQ 2.0. Also explore, is it how do you pronounce that? Genos
International. Yeah.
now. And I did put the link to their website in the chat. So anybody listening to that. Bruno, we're right at time. Anything else before we wrap this?
No, I think we have covered most of. Well, it was just an introduction to to emotional intelligence.
A good introduction. Yeah.
But I wanted to cover this topic, and I will say to Catherine, if you want to interact and talk to Lynn, talk, because I have the same challenge when I select the emotional intelligence. I was looking for many different certification and to try to get the most of my learning. And there are so many who are good. So if you want to interact with Lynn, please don't hesitate. We can give you the contact details.
I'll just say one last thing, Jim. I know we're at time, but the difference with Genos for any of the other ones I've seen is that they measure the importance of that particular emotional intelligence skill to the organization. So the importance is the systemic cultural aspect of it. No one else does that. And you can't operate in a vacuum because you work in the workplace. And so that's the key differentiator, which I think is really critical.
I think that's a good last word. Bruno, let's thank Lynn for coming today. Would you do that for me?
Absolutely. So thanks, Lynn, a lot for coming today, and thanks a lot for all this time of preparation. I know it was the end of the year and it was very fast-paced for everyone, and I really appreciate that you were available to do that.
Yes.
And I will finish by thank you, Lynn, and hashtag start with strength. That's
Thank
the
you
big
so
learning
much.
of today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight working with you guys. And I hope everyone has gotten some really good tips and can take this out and make it work for them.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to end the year. You know, this is our last webcast for 2021. A lot of folks listening to this on the podcast version will be catching at the very first of the year for 2022. So maybe it's a great way to start the year as well. Kind of be thinking about that. It's been a journey for me. While I haven't done any certifications and I haven't been through it, the highlight or the bringing emotional intelligence to the forefront of our thinking has been really, really helpful to me. And I run in a way that it's just been very, very beneficial to do it. So, Lynn, thank you for me too. You guys hang tight for me 1 second. With that, I'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available now in Gallup Access. Lynn mentioned that a little bit earlier. Been a while since I heard someone say Gallup online. So not that it was bad. It was an okay platform. You can head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths for coaching, master coaching, or become a Gallup certified strengths coach. We mentioned that a couple times. You can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We'll get that to the right person to help you out with that. You can join us on any social platform just by searching Clifton Strengths. And that, well, thank you for joining us and for closing out the year. If you're listening live, for those of you in the chat room, thank you. Catherine says, thanks so much for a great session. For those listening live, thank you for coming out and closing out 2021 with us. We're very excited. Bruno, just a couple days ago, I didn't have anything scheduled for January, and I already have like 7 things now scheduled for the community for January. So excited to what we'll bring for you in 2022. Thanks for coming out tonight. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you'd share it. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.